NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
It was a cold March night on a dark winter day. The freezing winds had blown the citizens to the chill, but their blood was boiling so hot that none of them cared when they all gathered together in anger to protest the British who had been stationed in their city for the past 5 years. The conflict had arisen to such a point that anger could be felt in everyone's bodies. And when it exploded finally, Captain Thomas Preston stood in front of hundreds of people. Behind him, just 8 British soldiers begging the crowd to settle down. But they didn't. Rocks flew, chunks of ice flew, and within a few moments, shots were fired and people were dead. Preston was immediately taken. He was put under house arrest. Guards were called out. The city erupted into demands for his head. And no one would take his case in what was supposed to be a fair trial. What would become known as the Boston Massacre, was a place that most of us find many of our criminal experience today being created by a young lawyer named John Adams who took that case. Adams didn't really want to take it at first, but he realized that he had no choice because no one else was stepping up. And the case took actually 6 months to come to trial, which at the time was unheard of across the globe. The case was so visible that publishers in London said that they would pay the equivalent of thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars for the transcripts if they could just get them in time to put them into the book. Ultimately, Adams won the case. Preston was acquitted and was later, Adams would later say this was one of the most important pieces of work he had ever done. But why is that important to us? It's important because out of that case came a multitude of things we still do today. The dying death declaration was first used in that trial. Arguments about reasonable doubt had existed, but it is one of the first known cases of the reasonable doubt instruction being used. Information about hearsay, about the way you present evidence, about how to cross-examine witnesses. Things such as it's better for one man to go free or one innocent man to go free than 100 guilty men. Do you remember that phrase? I think I got it backwards. But that came from that trial. I got that backwards, didn't I? Let them all hang. In either case, all of these things came from this trial. And they became part of the vernacular of lawyers. It's what they began to study and who we became, in large part because it was so popular and so visible that it transcended time, and at the time, lawyers learned from each other. By 1836, another huge trial came along. It was what I have posted as the acquittal of the young gentleman, Robert Robinson, in the death of the prostitute Helen Jewett. It was the first major case where sex became the topic that was allowed to be published in newspapers across the globe. He was accused of hitting her 3 times in the head with an axe and then burning her body to a crisp. A terrible crime. He was acquitted largely because of class differences. The blue-collar workers of the day wanted him strung up. The gentlemen of the day couldn't imagine this. The judge ultimately gave an instruction that said prostitutes are not to be believed, and the whole case was prostitutes testifying because this guy was a frequent visitor of prostitutes at that brothel. Ultimately, he was acquitted, and the case was over. Now, why is this important? Because this case was, at the time, the crime of the century. And from its transcripts, many of our habits were also created. A wonderful ex-DA by the name of Ogden Stiers, I think, but Ogden was his first name, was the defense attorney on this, and his flamboyant ways became the transcripts which many people looked at. By 1892, the Fall River tragedy, also known as the trial of Lizzie Borden, who, as we know, took an axe and gave her 40 whacks. But she was acquitted. And in this trial and in this transcript, lawyers had been building upon each other for years and years, looking at the way each other had done things, and we had become routine in the way we presented our cases. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, it's just what happened. By 1906, the ABA adopted a 3-year requirement for lawyers to go to school. Prior to that, it had been apprenticeships and clerkships. There was but a scant few law schools in the country. Harvard, Columbia, William and Mary, and about 6 others were the only real law schools. Everybody else just went to work for a lawyer. And what did they study? Each other. That's how they learned until 1906, when they began this process of law schools. Now, let me tell you a story, kind of an urban antidote that I like. It goes something like this. A young woman recently married decided she wanted to cook a pot roast for her in-laws. Scared of how it might turn out, she called up her mom and said, "Mom, how do I cook a pot roast?" And Mom said, "Well, that's easy. But the first thing you got to do is cut off the ends." But why do we cut off the ends? Because that's how you make a juicy pot roast. It seals in the juices. It's all these wonderful things. It gets the seasonings to the center. And she said, "But Mom, they're just new ends. Why do we do that?" And she goes, "That's the way my mom did it. Let's call her." So they call Grandma. And Grandma comes over and says, "Oh yeah, first thing you got to do, slice off the ends of the pot roast." Right? That's the first thing you do. And then she explains all the reasons why, about how you do this and how you do that, and how the ends by the butcher are all mangled and you have to get to the fresh meat and all of that. It still doesn't make any sense. So the daughter says, "I don't understand still." Well, that's how my mom did it. And they bring over great-grandma. Great-grandma comes over and looks and says, "What are you doing?" They said, "We cut the ends off the pot roast like you did, always told us to do." "I cut the ends of the pot roast off because my oven was small." This principle is very important because it's going to transcend a lot of what we're going to talk about today in the way we do things and approach things as lawyers. I'm not saying that we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're not. But we're going to explore a different way to look at what we do from the point of view of social psychologists and psychologists. About the same time that the Fall River tragedy, the Lizzie Borden trial was taking place, psychology was being born, mostly in Europe. The first degree, in fact, was granted in 1893. And over the next 40 years, there was an explosion of all different types of psychological reviews. By the 1950s, social psychology began to find its feet in academia. And in that social psychology world, studies started to be done that were without any kind of ethical bounds. They pretty much could do whatever they wanted at the time because no one seemed to care, and they had no back history to look to. So all types of very aggressive studies were done to try to figure out how it is that people interact with each other. Because something we know as social psychologists is that no one is an island. We all interact with each other, and that interaction changes the dynamic of what will ultimately occur. We go in believing that we're going to act a certain way, but once we find ourselves in a group or in a social situation, we act differently than perhaps our core beliefs would even allow us to do. And that's the study of social psychology. And if you haven't seen it yet, this is the problem that we're going to be addressing as we talk about the habits of the past and how the science of the present can mend together to try to give us a greater insight into how to approach our juries. Couple thoughts. One, we need to remember that jurors are sentient agents of the experiences, not just passengers who are going along for the ride. What I mean by that is jurors specifically are not just jurors. They're people who are thinking experiencing, feeling, taking on different roles as they go forward. The lost and confused, the listener, the judge, the person to whom everybody's sucking up to, something they maybe have never experienced before. All of these things are taking place as they go through the process. They're not just jurors. And that's an important thing to remember. It's obvious, but if we don't start from there, we can't get to where we want to be. I wrote some of these things up because I like them. Some of them I took from quotes. But a juror is also a highly focused social situation where the process and results being the product of a dynamic interplay between each other. In 1 second, I'm going to prove this to you, but I want to put up one more thing, which is a caution, which is social psychology has spent a lot of time studying human interaction, and they have also, quite frankly, greedily studied how jurors make decisions, but they don't share it with us as lawyers. There are all kinds of journal articles about how juries make decisions in social psychology journals that are highly intelligent, well-written, and well thought out and studied with great statistics. But they don't share them with us. They just kind of keep them to themselves. And then if we go to find them and read them, we're lost within 30 seconds because they're really complex algorithms of mathematics, which obviously we're lawyers because we don't do math, right? So it gets complex. And I've tried to, in this presentation as we go forward, I've tried to do a lot of that by going through the principles in an intelligent way that's adoptable to what we do. But we must always remember that juries are a unique situation that has almost no parallel in society. In fact, it has no parallel in society. But that doesn't mean that the psychological and social psychological effects don't hit them. It just means that it's a unique situation. All right. If you don't believe me, I want to say this before I come to that. If you don't believe me, I'm going to ask you this kind of interesting question. If I told you that at your next trial, you could have, at the end of the trial, all 12 jurors go to separate rooms and vote without going into a jury room, without having to deal with the pressures of that, without a judge giving them further instructions unless they asked for them, they just went and voted. How many of you right now would say, done? Yeah, right? Because would a jury ever decide again? Would there ever be a verdict again? Ever? Every jury would hang. Nearly. Every jury would probably hang. Which leads us to this problem. Why do they change? Why does somebody whose core belief alone, who would stand up and put their arm to the square and say, Judge, I swear to you that my verdict is not guilty, go into a room with 12 utter strangers, people they've never met in their life, and roll over, giving up core beliefs that, quite frankly, had they voted alone, would have gone and defended for the rest of their lives as absolutely being right? That's the real problem. What changes? What group dynamics hit them so hard? And what I'm going to try to do as I go through this is go through a whole list of principles, kind of from start to finish, of all these things that hit them in countless different ways. I'm actually prepared to speak for about 7 hours. Literally. I have about 140 slides. I don't know if I'm going to make it through all. I'm going to do the best I can. But I'm going to do an overview of things. I figured more nuggets was better, perhaps in this context, than fewer quality information. And second, last night, after listening to a lot of talks, I went back and pulled a bunch of slides, reorganized and added things in because I didn't want to repeat what people have been saying. So some of this is, going to flow that way. But one last thing that I want to say is this. Most of the history of trial advocacy that we have learned took place before the year 2000. In a time before multimedia, social media, and this type of information. In a world where facts were facts. Adams said in the Boston Massacre trial, facts are stubborn things. A quote used by lawyers for 150 years. Facts are stubborn things. But today, opinions are stubborn things. Opinions have supplanted in society facts. And that's a problem. It's a problem that if we don't overcome as criminal lawyers, we're going to lose every time because people's opinions are locked down. It's what we call confirmation bias. Most of us know what that is. It means that we have a position and then we just look for evidence to confirm that position. We don't really care about the truth. We just want to be upheld and told we're right. So we look to confirm our biases. And that's a problem. And it's why we have to become better. And in the next 50 years, I predict that law schools will have to start teaching social psychology to trial lawyers. It's going to have to happen because the science is there. We're just not looking at it. Probably because it's hard math and because they're not sharing, greedy little academicians. Okay, all right. So let's start talking about building our case from start to finish with psychological principles. And let me give you a short overview. What I'm going to do in this presentation is go through principles, one right after another, and try to bring them to us. I want you to know ahead of time that unless I tell you otherwise, this is all scientifically study-based information. In some cases, I'm going to tell you that it's an opinion or it's an experience, but for the most part, I'm pulling this from studies. I had thought about giving you the studies. Go look it up later if you're interested. It became too complicated and I wouldn't get enough to you. So let's just start here with illusion superiority. This principle basically suggests the following. It says that most people believe they are experts and they are above average. In fact, 80% so. 80% of us believe we're above average. And I love the story of MacArthur Wheeler, a gentleman in, I believe it was Pittsburgh, who committed a bank robbery in the mid-1990s. And it actually gave rise to a whole series of studies by psychologists on the study of illusory superiority. Mr. Wheeler robbed banks, and when he was caught that night was very upset that he had been caught. And I want you to know, he was neither crazy nor on drugs. He was caught because he was videotaped. And when they asked him and told him you were videotaped, he said, "That's not possible. I wore the juice." I'm sorry, what? You wore the juice? I wore the juice. I put lemon juice all over myself, which is invisible ink, and it shouldn't have been able to be seen by the videotape. Mr. Wheeler was dead serious. He believed it to his core. And his illusory superiority made him believe that he was not susceptible, that this lemon juice thing was going to work. And what this situation taught psychologists is that we all do this. We smear lemon juice all over us all the time and say it's going to work. The question just is, what is our lemon juice? So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do today is, hey, look, we're criminal lawyers. It means we're skeptical by nature. Set aside some of that skepticism. Allow me to enter inside of you just a few steps. Just a few steps. Put aside the juice and your feelings of superiority and say, that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply to my jury. That's not my experience. Set it aside for just a moment while together we explore concepts that you can later use as tools. Tools that will help you when you so choose to remove them from your belt and utilize them. A little bit more on this subject is that incompetent people are almost the worst because they tend to believe at an even higher level of their superiority. In other words, the dumbest of us think we're the best. What a mess! And this applies to jurors. They walk in and immediately think that they're the best jurors ever. They think that they have all the answers. How many of us know this? We just put on evidence that was beyond reproach, scientifically based, and wonderfully crafted, and they're saying, that's not what I saw on CSI. No sirree, bub. They're not saying that out loud, but that's what's running through their heads. And one of the methods that psychologists discovered goes way back to ancient Greece to overcome this. And it's using the Socratic method to unwind this. give you the example. They did some studies and some analogies on this with vaccines. We're not here to talk about vaccines and how any of you feel, but there is an ongoing debate about whether or not you should vaccinate your kid. And there's a whole bunch of scientific evidence that says you should, and I guess there's some that says you shouldn't, but it doesn't matter. Whatever side of the coin you're on, you're done. You're not really listening to what the other person has to say about it anymore. The facts are out the window. The opinions are all that matter. But what they discovered was if they put people into a situation and have them explore the problem Socratically through questions and answers, by visiting, discussing, discovering, and coming to a conclusion, that they find the right answer. They do. Because the Socratic method forces them into solution-solving mode. And one way to eliminate illusory superiority is to get into problem-solving mode. So what you want to do with your juries is put them into problem-solving mode. Let me tell you something. Most trials feel like a tragedy, meaning the outcome is known. Everybody's going to die and you're going to convict the guy. They're just tragedies from the word go to the end. No, they're mysteries. And I'm not talking about turn it into me, so I'm talking about classical storytelling. Mysteries in the sense that we've got to figure this out. And you and me together, don't worry about that guy over there in the cheap suit and the badge. We're going to work this out together, you and me. And we're going to do it using this Socratic method to unwind the problem, including all of your preconceived notions. All right, let's go on to the next principle, the principle of the head start. I hate this, and I will tell you right now, if I could leave here today and do one thing, and one thing only, it would be to convince you of this. And that is, we have conceded the high ground in every trial that we do, almost without exception, and here's how. How many of you right now, whether just a show of hands or within the next 6 months of going to trial? Anybody? All right, look at all of us. If I went to you right now, put it in your head, if I asked you what type of a trial was coming up, I would bet it would be, and if you had to tell me what it was, the charges. I have a murder case. I have a DUI. I have a sexual molest case. That's the way we describe it. Why in the world are we describing our cases in their terms? The Boston Massacre trial has stuck around for the past 230 years or so because the Sons of Liberty got their engravings out, put their story out, and turned it into the Boston Massacre trial. Was it really? No, that wasn't what it was all. It was about mob violence. If I'd have been John Adams, and if I could do anything back then, if somebody came up to me and said, what kind of case are you doing? I got a mob violence case. Okay, what kind of trial are you doing? Is it a murder case? No, I don't have a murder case. I have a false identification case. Well, what kind of case? It's a false identification case. Well, what's the subject? False identification. Well, what's it about? I just told you, it's a false identification case. Well, what's the charge? Oh, the charge that the prosecution is claiming wrongfully is murder, but it's a false identification case. Don't give up. Why do you concede this? Why do I concede this? Why? Because we've been trained for the past 200 years. By the way, do you know that most jury instructions, including the reasonable doubt instruction, were created originally to help prosecutors get more convictions? It really was. Go back and look. It was originally created because people couldn't concede their religious beliefs to condemn somebody, and they had to create an instruction. Adams turned it into a defense verdict, but it was still for jurors in many ways because it was trying to ease their souls. Jury instructions, for the most part, were created to allow for convictions. You don't believe me? How many of you would like to have no jury instructions in your next trial? Right? If we could just stand up and say, let's talk about what happened, folks, we win a lot more cases. Right? So let's begin from the very beginning, from day one. When you know you have a trial, don't concede. Don't concede. It's not a child molest case. It's a case about I have a case, you know what I have a case about? I have a case about an angry and biased stepchild who's out to get my client's money. Holy cow, is that a civil case? Well, it's not, but it damn well should be. I'd sue that girl if I could, but unfortunately I've charged him with a crime. What kind of crime? You know what? It's a case about an angry, and on you go. If I could convince you of anything, this is what it would be. Change today the way you talk about your cases. And you know how you already do it? You do it in one case already. We do it in the no-drive DUI. Do any of you use that term, no-drive DUI? We use it in California a lot. Does anybody use that? No drive? They weren't driving. It's a DUI, but he wasn't driving. Oh, it's a no-drive DUI. Okay, that creates conflict. He wasn't driving. We've done that. We concede that case. We know how to say that case, but other cases we don't seem to do that. Stop! For heaven's sakes, don't give these people one more inch. Not one. It's a false identification case, period. End of subject. That's the principle of the Head Start. Let's not give it to them anymore. All right. And by the way, that begins from the beginning. Starts at the beginning. Let's go on to the next one. Principle of word choice. Over the last day and a half, you've heard people talk about word choice. Let me go a little bit deeper into the importance of word choice. Because word choice is what we do. It's who we are. Words are the tools of our trade. And the words we choose have specific meaning. And they don't just have specific meaning in the dictionary, they have significant psychological meaning. Let me give you a few examples. They did a study not too long ago where they showed some people an accident, cars coming together. In one group, they said it was an accident. In another group, they said it was a crash. In another group, they said it was a collision. Then they waited a period of time and they went back and asked people to describe what they'd seen. People that had seen a crash reported glass. But there was no glass being broken. But they reported it and they were certain they'd seen it. The word crash impacted them. The word accident has a different connotation. And the word collision has an entirely different connotation. All three have the same meaning. By the way, while I was studying this, I came across an article in a presentation by a prosecutor who actually said, the next time you're in a case and a defense attorney does this, count how many times they say the word accident and then tell the jury at the end, he used the word accident when we all know, doggone it, it was a crash. That was something that was being trained to prosecutors not too long ago. They're studying word selection. And so should we. We should carefully choose words for our case. And let me give you some examples. Here's one. They did a study on the words cause and produce. Cause, in 78% of the situations, creates a negative connotation. So if you say, did you cause that to happen? Or did you cause this to happen? When you're presenting to a jury, their minds are focused and trained to believe that what comes next is negative. What happened? I got cancer. Oh, what caused that? What caused the crash? What caused this? What caused that? Cause is a word that is usually followed by negativity. Produced is a different word. It means the same thing. It has the same potential definition, but produce had a much different result. It resulted in a positive reaction. It was viewed positively. So you might say to yourselves, what's the difference? Well, you might be having an officer on the stand and your words might be, you caused that police report to be created. Now, it's not big. It's not that the jury is going to all of a sudden, ooh, negative. But the word cause invisibly creates a negative sense of what's about to follow. And that's what the science says. We should start using the words caused and produced as we see fit. Well, what happened? Well, it produced this. He produced a gun. That doesn't sound nearly as bad, does it? Well, he produced a gun. If I asked you right now to say he produced a gun, well, the word gun is negative, but the word produced is positive. Do you see the difference? So what happened? He produced a gun. Did something bad happen or something good happen by producing the gun? If he caused the gun to come forth, it has a different vibe. All right, here's another one. Facts versus interpretation. Often, we have allowed ourselves to let the word fact be substituted for interpretation or opinions. We need to stop that. We need to let juries know the difference between facts and interpretations. Because you know what interpretations really are? Reasonable doubt. Reasons to doubt. That's what an interpretation is. Facts. Well, facts really do push us beyond reasonable doubts. But interpretations? We know what that is. That's as many, everybody has an opinion. We know what that follows. What follows after that, everyone has one, right? Interpretations, that's what that is. Let's start using those words correctly. Sir, is this a fact or is this an interpretation? Now, we're not going to ask him that way, but we're going to start using the word. So you interpreted this as such and such. You interpreted this as such and such. You interpreted this as such and such, right? Instead of just letting it hang there as a fact. Here's another one. We have to learn to negate the words that prosecutors use. I actually pulled this in from a talk yesterday. They were talking about gangs and the present use of the word gang. You know what? It's a terrible word. We don't like it. It has all kinds of bad connotation. And then we talk about, in fact, actually it was this morning. And he talked about motorcycle clubs. Was that this morning or yesterday? I've already lost. It was this morning, right? I just added that. Okay? Yeah, gangs is a terrible word. And clubs does sound better. I don't know if they're going to buy it from us, but what we can do is we can call them out on the use of their word gang. Folks, they're going to use that word gang over and over again, and they're using it to try to make you angry. That's why they're using it. I do that, and I love that in opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear the prosecutor talk about gangs. It's used to make you upset. It's an inflammatory word. Because it is. Under what situation can you use the word gang since Spanky and Alfalfa left the big screen? Can you use the word gang and have it not have a bad connotation? Learn to negate the words. Pay attention to the words they're using. A couple others. I like to use the words when I talk about in voir dire or an opening statement. I like to use the words discover and visit and how I'm going to cross-examine somebody. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a witness that's going to come out here. I don't say it like this, but ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a witness that's coming out here and we're going to visit together on some things. He and I are going to visit, and we're going to try to discover things. That's very different than I'm going to cross-examine his ass, right? Aren't you more interested in what we might visit about and discover? Not always, but sometimes. That's intriguing. Holy cow, these guys are going to discover something? That has almost the adventurer spirit in it. I put the word lurch up there because in one case, and I don't like war stories, but sometimes they're the only way you have to express something. I had a case not too long ago was assault with a vehicle. And we really struggled over what word to use to describe how my car had driven his Mercedes directly at the individual, slamming him and knocking him back 10 feet. And we really struggled, and we chose the word lurch. Because lurch just doesn't sound like you did anything wrong. Oh, the car lurched forward. It lurched. We started using the word lurched everywhere. And before the end of the trial, the judge actually, during instructions, used the word lurched. It just caught on like fire. The word lurched. We used it everywhere. And the minute that happened, I knew what was happening. We were going to win, and we did. And I really accredit a large part of it to the choice of the word lurch. Let me give you one more word that I love. I had another case where we struggled over words to introduce my client. It was a murder case. We felt very strongly about this, and we put up 100 words on the board, went through the thesaurus and everything until we finally came up with this simple phrase. Ladies and gentlemen, before you sits a truly innocent woman. That word truly seemed to carry an impact. And I would invite you to consider that word from time to time. Truly innocent. Not guilty. That doesn't sound right. No. Truly innocent. It carries weight because it informs you that there's a problem. Not just an innocent client, but a truly innocent woman. Conflict. All right, let's go on. I love this as one more variable in the choice of words. I've said it probably in every presentation I give because it's one of my favorite things. A cross-examination where hearsay is coming in through the officer because of all the exceptions that make the hearsay rules almost irrelevant. And I like to say this. Officer, isn't it true? More foundation, but officer, isn't it true? All of the things that you just said, you got secondhand. No, I heard them directly. No, sir. You heard them directly from the person that told you that, but you weren't there, right? You didn't see it happen, right? You weren't a participant in the event, right? In fact, it was 45 minutes later until you even arrived and everything was over and cleaned up, right? So everything you got was secondhand, Right? There's actually a study that was done that said when you call information to a jury as secondhand information, they will discount it. If they hear it as hearsay information, they don't care. It's equal. They accept it as fully acceptable. Secondhand knowledge is a wonderful set of words to use. And then you know what you get to do in closing argument? You get to stand up and talk all about how that secondhand information is nothing more than garage sale, flea market nonsense. Who wants to be convicted on secondhand garage sale information? Who? Which of you, ladies and gentlemen, with your biases that you came in here wanting to convict, would ever want to be convicted by secondhand information? Secondhand nonsense. Right? That sounds a lot better than, well, all you heard was hearsay. Really? Really? Truly? You don't think words matter? How many of you right now would put $100 down if we went out and gathered up 100 people and said, here's a bunch of hearsay information, will you convict? Or here's a bunch of secondhand knowledge that came from a garage sale, would you convict? Right? And yet how many of us have said, myself included, well, that was hearsay. Well, stop it. Just stop it right now. Just never again. Let's commit. Never again. It's secondhand crap. That's what it is. And by the way, this is just one example. Find sincere, honest, direct ways of calling things. This is just an example of it. When you're choosing words, look to your heart, to what it really is. Really is. And you know what? Sometimes it's just crap. And you gotta call it that. Maybe a little bit more polite. Maybe not. Okay, let's go on to the next principle. Principles of what I call seeds or priming. Priming is a concept in psychology that says if we tell you things that are related, you are likely to make a statement later based upon that priming. In other words, if I say to you right now, chocolate, tree bark, coffee, and a bunch of other words that have the word that are related to the word brown, and later I ask you what color the car was, you're probably not going to say brown because you're going to say what car, but priming would suggest that a majority of people would be likely to say brown. Why? Because they've been primed in their mind with coffee, chocolate, tree bark, whatever. And that's a very real concept. People can be primed. All of us can be primed. And it's not that direct, it's much more subtle, but it happens all the time. And planting seeds means from the very beginning to begin to prime people. Now, I have to step out of myself. I'm going to come over here and be the voice of reason for a moment and say, what I'm about to tell you should not be used for evil. You can't use this to create dishonesties. And I'm serious. This is a very powerful tool, and you could use this unethically. So don't. All right, we can go back over here now. So here's the way this happens. I recently, one day, woke up in my bedroom and had a pack of Lifesavers next to my bed, half eaten, that I'd been eating apparently during the night. And my wife says, Lifesavers. And I said, what are you talking about? I've been doing that for the last 20 years. She said, what are you talking about? I said, I've had a pack of Lifesavers by my bed for 20 years. Have you not paid attention? And pretty soon it kind of became a joke in the family. To this day, this is 2 years ago. Now it's 22 years that I've had a pack of Lifesavers by my bed. My kids don't know anymore whether or not I really had a pack of Lifesavers. They're always asking, Dad, is that real? Because I primed them. I planted seeds, and it's hung around. It's hung around. It's just a joke, but it's become real. And when we plant seeds, there's a chance that they're going to become real. You don't believe this either? How many times do police officers plant lousy seeds of dishonesty in witnesses? And once they're in there, can you get them out? No, because they've grown. They primed them. And the priming has created a reality that wasn't necessarily real. It gets worse if the correlated suggestions relate to core beliefs. So if it's something you believe, it's even more powerful. It gets down there at the core. So if we're going to prime people, we want to prime them at their core beliefs. Deep down. Deep down. As far as we can go. And as far back in time as we can go. Couple other ones. Later, we can recall those memories with prompts. And I'll explain what this means with my example in a minute. But what it means is that when we plant the memory, later we can recall it by using the same prompts that were there before. We can recall them on cross-examination. You interview a witness out in the field, or you have your investigator interview a witness in the field. He plants priming things there. Later, when you come on the stand and have them there, you recall them. They're coming out. There's a high probability they're coming out. See why we can't use that for evil? You could plant things in there and pull them out that aren't real. Elizabeth Loftus, if you've ever had a chance to see her, that's the person who really should have the best of. She talks about this kind of stuff all the time, how memories are falsely created. It happens routinely. And we're just now in the last 15 years discovering how rampant this is, how absolutely rampant this problem is. But for now, you need to understand that you can do this and how it works. Furthermore, people maintain an honest belief. In other words, they honestly believe the memory. My kids are honestly arguing nowadays about the lifesavers. And some of them have even said, oh yeah, I remember seeing those when I was a little kid. No, you didn't. I never put the dang lifesavers there. It was just, no, I'm not telling them anymore. Now it's just a joke. It's going to stay. And in 40 years when I'm dead, hopefully, whenever, Grandpa always had a pack of lifesavers by his bed. I remember as a little girl. And they're going to honestly believe it. They really are. Let me give you 2 examples of this. Many years ago, I had a little case. It settled. And it was back when pot was illegal to grow and sell in California and such. And I had a couple that was growing marijuana in their backyard. And I got to the police officer early on and started using words like long hair, having sex, and smoking weed. And I got the officer to kind of ultimately come up with the phrase, yeah, they're just a couple of hippies making love and smoking pot, smoking weed. That became the mantra of the case. And it was clear back at the police investigator level. When the case came to settle, and it did, I went to the prosecutor and said, hey, you know what, this case got just a long hair kind of people. He goes, oh yeah, I know, I talked to the officer. He said there are a couple of hippies making love and smoking weed. Sales charge dismissed. The seed had been planted way back in the past. And when it came all the way through to the prosecutor, now it had an honesty. It was honest, by the way. They weren't hippies, though. They were just, actually, I think they were like not even close to hippies, not even born in the 60s people. But the point was it didn't matter. That's the way they perceived. And it became the truth, and it became the reality. Again, it's why we have to be careful with this. One last one. I will confess on camera. I had a preliminary examination just a couple of weeks ago, and I thought I would experiment with this. So I used priming. It's an absolute fact that did not matter. It's never going to be an issue at trial, but I thought, what the heck, I'm going to roll the dice and see how it works. My client had shot a car out of anger 4 times. He had a gun, a black revolver. Everybody knows it's black. It's not an issue. The neighbor saw it, and she saw the gun. So I asked her a series of questions about the sun shining, about the chrome on the car, and about the color silver. When the finally time came to describe the gun, she called it a shiny silver chrome gun. No lie. And I did it intentionally. I wanted to see. I was just playing around in a prelim, seeing if it would work. I just wanted to know. I've done it before, but I wanted to see it firsthand because I knew I was going to be here. And lo and behold, that gun, and I will tell you right now, she will never change from it being a chrome gun. She's convinced. It's done. It's over. The seed is planted. It's taken root. It will never change. It doesn't matter. That's not the issue in the case. But to her, it's permanent. Now, I will ask you this. How many times has that happened to us? How many times has that situation, have we been, our clients been the victims of this? We need to, A, recognize how to prime, and B, unprime people. We have to unprime them by calling them out and by saying, hey, you heard this word. You know what? I noticed that you said the gun was silver. You know, the 4 questions prior that the prosecutor asked you were, was there shining? Was there silver? Was there chrome? Is there any chance that those 3 words influenced you? They'll say no, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't, because you've just pointed out that that has taken place. All right, let's go on next. Principle of roles. How much time do I have? 15. Okay, got to move this. In trial, I think that we often believe ourselves to be, as they would call in the classics hero tale, the hero. What this means is that as we stand up to try a case, We believe that we are the hero, torn from our life's work to come to this unfamiliar place, fight the dragon, who is the prosecutor and the charges, and overcome it and return home. The reality of it is that we are not Luke Skywalker or Katniss or James Bond or Captain Marvel. We are actually the mentor in the role, and we should stop viewing ourselves as the hero. The jury is the hero in the tale. They're the ones who have been ripped from their homes, placed in an unfamiliar circumstance, and forced to overcome something difficult. And they view us as the monster that they have to overcome. That's who they think we are. The criminal defense lawyer is the monster who has to be overcome, and the prosecutor sitting right there in the social distance of 5 to 7 feet from them the entire trial with all the benefits that come from that, and they are innumerable. They get the benefit of being the wise mentor. That 28-year-old snot-nosed kid who thinks he knows every damn thing in the world gets the benefit that after 28 years of trying cases, I can't get because I'm the defense attorney. Well, guess what? I'm not doing that anymore, and I haven't for years. It's done. I'll tell you who I am right now. I change. I decide early on what role I'm going to play because what I'm going to be is something different. I am going to be the teacher, maybe the outsider. Maybe it's a case where I have to be the outsider. Maybe it's one where I'm going to have to be the guide, the trusted friend. I'm older now, so I get to be the wise guy. And I don't mean the wise guy, the wiser guy, okay? We can act that way. We have a little bit of gray in our hair. We can now be wise and intelligent. We're not that monster. We're something else. Choose your role wisely, or it will be chosen for you. And when they choose it, they'll just choose you as an obstacle to overcome. But if we choose it positively, we can change the entire feel of a courtroom. As we teach, as we guide, as we discover, as we ask questions, as we make sure the prosecutor is fair. I always love this on cross-examination, opening statement, voir dire, wherever I get a chance. If the prosecutor asks all the questions, I won't have to ask any more. But if he's unfair and leaves things out, I'm going to have to stand up. I don't want to do that. I'd be glad to sit over here the whole trial. Let him ask all the questions, and when it's done, we'll get up. But if he doesn't ask those questions that must be asked, I will ask him. Is that wrong? That's not wrong of me, is it? I think we would all want to do that, right? I changed my role. I'm now Inspector 28. You know, remember in your pants you used to have a little piece of paper that said Inspector 28? I'm quality control for the prosecution. If they do their job, we all go home. If he doesn't do his job, shame on him, I'm going to make sure, right? We changed the role. All right. Sometimes we even need to be the television lawyer who strikes with anger and fury when we need to. They expect it. I don't have it up here, but it's the NASCAR principle, which basically says everybody goes to NASCAR races not to see them make left turns at 200 miles an hour. They go to see the crash, right? People want to see the crash. One more interesting study, and I wasn't able to get enough of this to get a feel for it, but they did some studies in the 70s and 80s where they dressed people up and had them give arguments. They dressed them up very conservative in a suit and a tie, looking very respectable. And they had them dress kind of in more flamboyant clothes. And then they had them give the exact same argument. And the question was, who would they find more credible? Now, I think most of us would think they would find the person in the suit more credible, except we're lawyers and criminal lawyers at that. So we say, oh no, probably the other guy. And you would be right. But why? And the answer was because sometimes when somebody is unexpectedly credible, it increases the credibility. This is probably given places for people who dress like the cowboy or dress kind of wild to come into a courtroom. Think of my cousin Vinny in his little velvet suit in the movie. You know, I wore this ridiculous thing for you. Remember that? He's more credible feeling because he looks ridiculous, but then he's credible. That's actually a psychological principle. I do not advocate that we start wearing clown suits to trial, but it is a principle, and it's something that we can consider when we choose our role. Okay, with 15 minutes, I'm going to skip a couple things. 10, all right. This is one slide. And it's really important. And I have done this over the last 6 months with 1,000 concepts, all of which usually took place when I was working out or driving, that I have forgotten that I wanted to tell you today. Why? Because we forget brilliance. We forget brilliance. Our minds are working. They're going along. They're thinking about our case. We have this fantastic idea over frozen yogurt covered in chocolate chip cookie dough, and then we forget it. We got to write things down because you will forget your brilliance. Now, I know all of us know this, but we should have trial books where we physically write them down. Because, by the way, studies still show, especially in older people, people over the age of 40, that when you write it down, you have a better memory of it. Younger people, I'm not so sure, that may be a little bit more typing. I text it to myself when I come up with an idea and send myself a text with that idea. Doesn't really work as well as when I write it down, for me. But that may be you. The point is, you got to write it down. And along with that same principle comes this principle. If you don't tell the jury, they're not going to know it. Everybody in here knows this, but we all do it. The better you know your case, the more you assume that they understand what you're saying. Right? We do that all the time. The better we know our case, the more we look and say, well, they know that. They know that. They understand that. No, they don't. This is the first and only time they've ever heard that story, and you've got to make it clear that your brilliance gets into their brain. Different principle. All right. Let's talk about this principle of symbols, changing the subject. People have a tendency to view the world through symbols or concepts. Now, what I mean by that is not like icons, although they are included in this, but like this. If I say to you right now, imagine a college football game, you're probably going to choose the school to where you went, or the team that you like, or some memory that will become the symbolic image of a college football game. Some of you might see Alabama, some of you might see Ohio, some of you might see some small school in the Pacific Northwest or in New England. I don't know. But our concept and image, our symbol, will be different. People collect information in symbolic fashions. Juries are gathering information in symbolic fashion. As you present them information, they see things move through as concepts and symbols. And what happens is they're going to give structure to the story you're telling based upon their common daily experiences. So when you say something along the lines of it was a domestic violence, they probably aren't seeing a crappy motorhome out in the back neighborhood. They might be seeing their very own home, which has a very different feel if you're trying to explain why there was a domestic violence incident. It seems much more harsh if the symbol in my mind is my clean suburban home with 3 little children watching television happily, and all of a sudden my husband comes in and slugs me because dinner isn't ready, right? Is a very different feel than if it takes place in a trailer home with crap everywhere, with a little kid running around with no diaper on, and with, the pot burning and all kinds of problems. I'm not saying anybody is more guilty or innocent. I'm just simply saying the symbology is different. It's different. And each person is assuming their own symbology? Symbology. Maybe I just made that word up. Their own symbolism. There it is. Yay! Their own symbolism. They're assuming their own symbolism unless you get them into the correct state. And you just need to understand this. This is how they process information. It's while stereotypes continue to haunt us or benefit us. Or benefit. Because it's both. I'm talking about as trial lawyers, not life in general. I'm talking about as trial lawyers. Sometimes a stereotype is a wonderful thing. This guy was a gang member, right? That carries a lot different weight than, this guy was a member of a social club. Okay? I like, and by the way, one last thing on concepts. They also include the concepts of justice, fairness. They view those as symbologies too, so you have to include that. I want to give you 2 examples of this. One was this. If I say to you the phrase tow yard, it conjures an image. If I go out and photograph a tow yard And it's a beautiful tow yard where it's all clean and orderly and everything is friendly and they got fresh cups of coffee and nice people in matching shirts. That's not a tow yard. That's a tow yard. That's a nice place. You may not want to show the picture of the nice, clean tow yard if your case wants to be at a tow yard. Right? You don't want to do that. If you show them this beautiful place and they see all that, you've just destroyed the symbology. Now, if you want to do the converse, you do the converse. And you can reverse the mindset. The point is, choose your symbology well or it will choose you. It will. And you won't be able to stop it because once it's embedded in their souls, it doesn't come out. All right. Now, with just a couple minutes before our break, I have other areas that I'd like to go to, but I want to talk about the principle of the cliffhanger. My slide is about 9 down, so I can't get to it. But there's this wonderful concept called the cliffhanger. And what the cliffhanger says is that if you can build tension and leave people wondering what's going to happen next, it will cause them to want to know more. They'll become more interested. And you can create tension and cliffhangers during trial by doing many things. You can do them as one big thing, or you can do them as little moments when you pause. But the one point here is that cliffhangers bring us back. They bring us back to where we want to be. Now, I would like you to come back, so let me leave you with my cliffhanger. When we return, I am going to tell you a story. It's not a true story, it's just an allegory. And it's a story that most of you will probably view as misogynistic, and it will be, maybe even some will go, my gosh, how could you tell that belittling story about people? But I will invite you that when I tell this story upon return, that if you will open your hearts honestly and let go for just a moment of all of the mistakes of the tale, of all of the wrongs and the immaturities of the tale, that it has the power to literally change the way you view people. It's a story that truly, honestly, and if I can't sell that when I come back, then the rest of what I have to say is gone. But if you open your hearts when we return, I will give you a story, not for trials, not for what we do as criminal lawyers, but for yourselves, for your relationships with others, that will change who you are when we come back.